Hey guys, this is Jonathan McCormack. I'm an attachment specialist in New York, and you can find me at attachmenthealinghelp.com. And I just want to talk about how different attachment styles show up for sex and sexual relations. And I'm just going to go through the different attachment styles and then get deep about why that happens. So, the first type of attachment style is avoidant or dismissing avoidant. And people with dismissing avoidant, they experience emotional neglect. They kept reaching out for a parent figure, and that figure did not respond, did not reciprocate. So eventually, they just shut down. And the avoidance problem is deactivating. They just emotionally shut down. So the dismissive or the avoidant, they want sex in a relationship as much as anyone. Yeah. At least before they get into the relationship. Once they get into the relationship, the dynamics change a little bit. And this is because of childhood patterns. And avoidance can come on very charismatic, very attractive, because they're not needy. They're not needy. They're not trying to be liked. They're just who they are. And this can be very attractive. And at first, it's great, and people love it. But then, after a couple months, they just shut down. They shut down. All of a sudden, the sex dries up. The passion, that's not there. But the truth is that the dismissive always cuts off sex from love in the relationship. What's interesting is they lose interest in love, in the intimate aspect, after they start having sex, often. Because the sex relieves the tension state, and they bond just through that sex. That's nice. They don't want anything deeper. They flee from intimacy. So if you want to date an avoidant, the best thing to do is wait as long as you can before sex. You want to bond. You want to bond with friendship. You want to bond with value system, those things. Because once sex comes in, the avoidant will kind of just keep going there to get his needs met. And Sue Johnson talks about 3 types of sex. And for the avoidant, it's sealed off sex. They're there, but they're not there. They're there physically, but not emotionally. And I've had a lot of people tell me their greatest lover was an avoidant. Well, it depends what you mean by lover. It's attractive because the avoidant is not showing up to impress you. It's not showing up to be needy. And so he's just there kind of for him or her. And that allows the partner to kind of relax and open up, and it's very free. But the avoidant doesn't feel an emotional connection. In fact, I remember one time an avoidant was talking to me and goes, I had my girlfriend told me we had sex, and she goes, last night we had sex, and I didn't feel anything. And he says, I didn't know you were supposed to feel something. What are you supposed to feel? For her, having sex was a way to gauge the relationship. That was completely foreign to him. He had no idea what that meant. And not only that, he told me, oftentimes an avoidant will deactivate if this is a person that perhaps they might love. If that's a possibility, they just shut down. And sex is completely mechanical, and it's scarcely more than masturbation. There's no emotional aspect. There's no passion. And the avoidance to make up for this lack of emotional passion are usually pretty good on the technical aspects. Some of these guys, I've talked to them, they read all these manuals, how to do this, how to do that. They're fine mechanics. There's nothing natural or playful. Then there's the anxious, preoccupied person. And of course, that's the person who was hypervigilant. And when they were growing up, they had to attach onto other people. And these guys, they really want relationships and love. And these are the same people who are particularly prone to confuse sex with love. Oftentimes they have sex to avoid rejection, to attain love and intimacy. And the problem there is that if they have their sex too early in their relationship, they don't first bond to form strong attachments with the right people. You know? In other words, they start having sex and the feelings become so strong, so enmeshed, that they are just bound to this person. We've all heard of the avoidant anxious dance, right? So this is like so poisonous and toxic and deadly. It's a trap. You know, the anxious and avoidant person, the anxious person wants to glom on, avoidant gets triggered. Whew. And then when that happens, the anxious person gets triggered. Whoa, someone's pulling away. They just trigger each other. But this is giving you a cocktail of emotions, and it's very seducing. So what this is, Sue Johnson calls this soulless sex. Soulless, you know, you receive solace, you receive calm, soothing. When one of the partners feels anxious about their partner's love, and when they feel afraid of their own needs, they're afraid to talk openly about them, usually they begin to use sex in order to find some comfort for their fears. And with soulless sex, couples may have sex all the time, but it's never satisfying. I talked to a girl, I think it's just today, and she said, if my boyfriend's not horny, I feel unsafe. Oof, well, that's a lot of pressure on your boyfriend. He's kind of got to have his engines revving 24/7. If he doesn't, you feel rejected. That's a lot of pressure, you know? So you think, oh, the anxious person, yeah, that's the person who's really intimate. But how authentic is that bond? I remember when I started doing this on Zoom, seeing people on Zoom, I put the Zoom, and it was me and the girl who I was talking to, and she was telling me her problems, and the whole time I just stared at my square. That's all I saw the whole time, just staring at it. I can't believe I have this big, fat Irish head. Why didn't no one tell me how fat my head is? I can't believe it. It looks terrible, just staring at me. And I didn't see her. Well, that's a little silly, you know. But that's what's happening with the anxious. The anxious person doesn't even see this person for themselves. This could be anybody. It just has to be someone who meets their needs. And it doesn't matter who it is. And when they're looking, they actually see themselves and their own needs. And there's reasons for this. Think about a rabbit sees a carrot. A wolf shows up. That rabbit forgets about the carrot. The carrot's still there. It sees the carrot, of course. It's there, but it just, your mind goes, wolf, threat. And the wolf picture gets bigger and bigger till he can't see the carrot. Well, for an anxious person, the threat is that this person will leave. And that's all they see. That's all they see. So it's hard to have a really authentic relationship. And then there's disorganized or fearful attachment. And people who are disorganized, that naturally are very ambivalent about romance and sex. On the one hand, they want strong connections and sexual experiences, and on the other, become very overwhelmed with all these strong feelings that come up, and they need to protect themselves from it. And that's because they experienced a lot of fear as a kid. And this is terrible, because think about it. You have the two strongest instincts, the instinct for reproduction and to be loved and sex. And then you have the instinct for survival. And your instinct for survival says, that's the one that's dangerous. And you pit the two strongest instincts against each other. And the feeling is intolerable. I like to look at a lot of art and poetry, because people with attachment problems, they suffer and no one sees it. No one sees them. what they go through. So there was a poem by Louise Glick. She just died a few weeks ago, won the Nobel in 2020. A lot of attachment problems. They called her the Ice Queen of poetry. And she had a hard time, and she knew it too. So this poem is called Mutable Earth. I just thought this was a good example. It goes, are you healed? Or do you only think you're healed? I told myself, from nothing, nothing could be taken away. But can you love anyone yet? When I feel safe, I can love. But will you touch anyone? I told myself, if I had nothing, the world couldn't touch me. In the bathtub, I examined my body. We're supposed to do that. And your face too? Your face in the mirror? I was vigilant when I touched myself. I didn't feel anything. Were you safe then? I was never safe, even when I was most hidden, even when I was waiting. So you couldn't protect yourself? The absolute erodes the boundary, the wall around the self erodes. If I was waiting, I had been invaded by time. But do you think you're free? I think I recognize the patterns of my nature. But do you think you're free? I had nothing, and I was still changed, like a costume. My numbness was taken away. Then hunger was added. And that can happen especially with avoidance, where they're numb, and all of a sudden they wake into those needs. And this hunger that they didn't even know was there, this love-starved hunger comes out ravenous, and it frightens them. And that needs to be managed. So how is this happening? Deep dive. I mean, if you really want to know what's happening, I'm just going to go into it right here. And everyone knew this. Freud, even way back in the day, Freud attributed the split between love and desire. You can split those two, and he referred that as to a psychical impotence, because you're taking the life and the passion away from that. And so you would naturally seek objects which don't lead to love, because you don't want sensuality and the thing you love together. So you have this situation where wherever this person loves, they don't have true desire. And wherever they truly desire, they cannot love. And this is part of a lot of modern times, kind of degrading romance to render it secure, render it safe, render it predictable. But geez, I mean, it's wild, and it can harm you, So why do people with attachment problems have trouble projecting value onto people and then holding on to that value? What's interesting, Winnicott observed that transitional objects gradually lose their value and become meaningless in the face of prolonged separation from mother. You're attached to your mom, but eventually you have to go on your own. That's scary. So you have little transitional objects, like a blanket, like a stuffed animal, something like that. And it's just a blanket, though. It's nothing. But you have the ability to inject value and excitement into this blanket. And all of a sudden that kid is that blanket. It could be any blanket. No, this one blanket was able to inject value into it because it associates it with the mother, And Bowlby, the attachment guy, found there's a relationship between these transitional objects reflected in the relationship with the parent. So example, kids who loved cuddly stuffed animals, their mother would cuddle with them all the time. And on the other end, kids who were emotionally neglected and experienced a lot of deprivation, none of them became attached to a cuddly object. And then ambivalent or disorganized, as a kid you call it ambivalent, they grow up to be disorganized, they would cling tightly to their stuffed animal or blanket, as much to their mother To them, the blanket was the substitute for the mother. Now, grow up, and you have this anxious, preoccupied person, and their lover is the parent. And if they abandon them, they're doomed. They're doomed, you know. An avoidant child will be somewhat depressed, even with an object, because he kind of denies he has needs at all. Interesting, with the disorganized that becomes preoccupied, anxious. When they grow up, they often endow objects, toys, whatever, cars, motorcycles, whatever, with a significance that is so great that they become inconsolable in its absence, Like, you've seen people, like, they lose their car, and it's almost like they lost their wife, They're just inconsolable. Why? Because this was their transitional object. Yeah, they can make contact with mom, and they can't with a woman. But yeah, they can do it with this car, That's what they can do. So what happens? Well, why come avoidant people can't make that attachment to people, consistently? Well, probably as a child, they weren't mirrored. The parents didn't mirror what that child was going through. And if the parent doesn't mirror what that child's going through, that child will know himself. If the child's crying, the parent reacts, and the child sees himself in the parent, and the parent validates how they're acting, and he knows himself. He gets to know himself. But if that doesn't happen, he doesn't recognize himself or his needs. And the truth is, if you're not valued, it's very difficult to value anyone or anything, because you don't know what that's about. It makes me think of Kafka, the guy who wrote about the guy who woke up as a roach. He has this great story called The Hunger Artist, and it's about this guy. He's an artist of hunger, and he just starves himself to death because the world didn't provide him with what he wanted, with his needs. And because when the world fails to meet your needs, you reject it. Some people, disorganized, will even want to punish the world. Yeah. So one of the things is you need to know what you want. That comes from mirroring. By that, you gain the capacity to value and to be valued, because you know what you want, you know what to value. And when I meet people, I make a big deal of, like, where are we going? What exactly do you want? We write it down specifically. What would it look like if you got what you want? Attachment problems? That is very difficult. I mean, people spend session after session. Just tell me what you want. What's your goal? They cannot do it. Naturally, of course they can't. So when you're not valued, you lose energy, interest, because the mother's holding isn't there. The mother holds your emotions for you, holds those boundaries for you. And if that's not there, that holding, what disappears is almost the feeling of existing, because that holds yourself. It's one of the reasons marriage used to be important. I don't know about now, but because it's not, when you have a relationship, if you want to hold the energy so it just doesn't dissipate, you have forms, rituals, or whatever it is, community, whatever, a bunch of things coming together to give it shape and form, to hold the energy. Just like your mother held you and held all that energy, made space for you to cry and to do all those things, But if you don't have any holding, you don't have a place to put your libido, the sexual impulse that attaches value to things. And there's kind of a phrase, when there's nowhere to attach my libido, I cease to feel I exist. Because that libido is what connects you. And if you're not connected, problem is, with attachment, you haven't internalized the mother's holding. You haven't internalized, like, inside I feel held. I feel held. And if that's true, you're going to have a constant addictive need for the holding provided by others. And that's going to be combined with a distrust and anxiety about others. So you're going to be a constant state of stress, alienating between the dread of being alone and the dread of a relationship where you might be betrayed. Oof, that's pretty rough. So what happens if you're a kid and no one meets your needs? You reach out, nothing happens. They reject you. Well, at that point, your libido becomes withdrawn. And you lose any interest. And if you're an adult, you lose sexual interest in the absence of a response from the other. You put yourself out there, and you get rejected. You put yourself out there and you get no response. Here I am, Is the world going to open up like a warm mother and welcome me and give me a nice job, give me this, help me with that? Are people going to respond to my needs? And if it doesn't, eventually your libido it's just painful. It just withdraws. Because you need an other to sustain it, that you can meet face to face. And this frustration leads to withdrawal. Just like the loss of an erection in the face of an indifferent response, because that's what arousal is. Arousal needs to be met to be maintained. And there's a very important between, I just mentioned the erection, that's your libido, that's your life energy, that's like, yes, I'm going out. It's not withdrawn, it's going in. It may sound ridiculous, but I do recall being in psychoanalysis as like a 17-year-old kid, and this German kind of Freudian guy, he would ask, like, oh, how are your erections? I was like, yeah, this guy's 80 years old. What is he asking me about that for? And he's like, if your little guy's happy, you're happy. I was like, this is very uncomfortable. This is very, very cringy. I don't like it. But he saw like that creativity, that play is attached to your libido. You can live an incredibly erotic life without having sex at all. Just the way you are, the way you experience the world, the way you frame things. Eros is everywhere. You don't need a relationship to live, a fairly Eros-bound erotic life. You do need a response from the world, though. You need something, and if you don't get that, it kind of just drains away. And so there's more to it, but that's the basics of what's happening to different people when their needs aren't met. And by the way, everyone has these patterns, so I really wouldn't worry about it. This is something that you work on together. And all you have to do is be upfront with these needs and be honest and be very vocal. Easier said than done. But in the future, I'll go more into it, how to do dating with being attachment impaired. Okay, so I appreciate you guys listening to me ramble. This is Jonathan McCormick. Thanks.